Karl Branson arrived with the weight of bureaucracy and a neat stack of files. He had inherited the oversight of this remote, rural U.S. park and its lone ranger, Cliff Hammonds. To Karl, the grove was merely a spreadsheet, a resource to be managed. The ranger station, a weathered shack surrounded by unsettling silence, immediately struck him as an inefficiency. Cliff met him with a silence that felt less like politeness and more like geological time. His movements were slow, his uniform faded, yet oddly spotless. Karl felt his own city anxieties sharpen. The inspection began inside the dusty, sun-dappled office. The files were the first fracture. Everything was loose, handwritten, and bafflingly inconsistent. Cliff's last two supply requests simply stated, balance. Karl rifled through the personnel section until his fingers landed on a thick yellowed piece of paper. The date on the file read 1832. Karl immediately accused Cliff of fraud, of being a squatting liability. Cliff did not flinch, his eyes fixed on the outside air. The ledgers, Cliff's voice was low and oddly textured, are as they need to be. Karl prepared to call the state office, pulling out his smartphone. He noticed the charge indicator was critically low. The nearest town was 2 hours back. Cliff, sensing the interruption, merely pointed at a broken generator outside. The grove does not care for wires, Cliff said, his old-world vocabulary slightly archaic. You rest here. It is ill-advised to travel the long road when the sun closes. We will find balance in the morning. Karl, desperate to secure his evidence before alerting authorities, agreed to stay. That night, sleep was impossible. The shadows danced. A low, rhythmic humming seemed to pulse from the foundation. Karl clutched his briefcase, realizing he was trapped. The morning brought a chilling mist. Karl, dressed in his no-rumpled suit, joined Cliff for the promised patrol. Karl hoped to gather enough incompetence to justify the arrest. Cliff simply led them deep into the old growth. You have words for everything. Karl Branson, Cliff finally uttered. The phrase Karl Branson pronounced like a foreign title. But you do not hear the grove. He gestured to a patch of mushrooms. They are the memory here. They tell of the ages. They passed a large, decaying log. Cliff paused. Karl saw nothing. But for a split second, the texture of the rotting wood seemed to resolve into the undeniable pattern of ancient, mineralized ivory, the unmistakable look of a mammoth tusk. It vanished instantly. Karl quickly rationalized the sighting as light and shadow tricks. He pushed his clipboard forward. Your quarterly game count is low, Hammonds. We need to maintain deer populations for tourism stability. They encountered a carcass, a magnificent buck, dead for days. Karl demanded intervention, demanding an investigation into possible disease or poaching. We must protect the resources. Cliff studied the scene, not the carcass. This life, Cliff stated, using a vocabulary that felt like it belonged to a biblical translation, was done. It is not an error. It feeds the grove now. Balance is preserved. He walked past it without a further glance. Cliff then made a rare comment about himself. When the settler came, I took the shape of the buffalo. Before that, the lizard of the great heat. I am not the rule. I am the rule's shadow. The grove decides its own shape. They were nearing the remote border. Cliff's slow pace abruptly ended. His body became rigid. Karl saw the shift immediately. This was not apathy, but absolute focus. Something had disturbed the ancient rhythm. I will speak of the mountain lion, Cliff murmured, his voice now lower, almost a vibration. He was beautiful. He hunted for the pleasure of the blood. He killed his own kind, not for food, but for the thrill of the end. His killing did not feed the grove. His actions were a sickness. He threw the whole turning of the wheel into error, a beautiful error. So he had to be stopped, not with fury, but with logic. I gave him the red blossom, Cliff said, using the archaic term for cancer. A slow cessation. He earned the slow end. He was put down. Now, I must give the quick cessation. Karl watched him disappear. Then he saw the camp, crude traps and a tarp-covered pile of what looked like pelts. The trappers were targeting the grove's cornerstone rodent, a species vital for spreading the symbiotic fungi. The imbalance was structural. Cliff moved because the grove itself was under threat. Karl, panicking, raced back to Cliff's vehicle and retrieved a heavy park-issued hunting rifle, clutching it tight. Cliff returned to Karl, his eyes colder than before. They hunt the spreader. They kill the grove. This is not for you to witness. Karl Branson, stay. Be silent. Cliff returned to the shadows. The stillness was broken by the sound of two men entering the clearing, talking loudly. They were the trappers. Karl crouched behind a deadfall, the cold rifle heavy in his hands. From the forest where Cliff disappeared came the first sound, not a shout, not a struggle, but a sound of compaction, followed by a choked, single gasp. The remaining trappers screamed and ran towards Karl's direction. Karl, heart hammering, saw the figure emerge from the dense undergrowth. Instinct took over, the fear, the adrenaline, the sudden sound of breaking twigs nearby. A third figure emerged from the brush, a man returning late to the camp. Karl, mistaking him for the pursuing monster, squeezed the trigger. The sound of the gunshot was monstrously loud in the sacred silence. The third trapper fell. Cliff emerged from the shadows. He looked at the two trappers he had neutralized, one with a broken neck, the other with their bones inexplicably separated, then looked at the third, accidentally killed by Karl. Cliff did not address Karl's action. He surveyed the balance. The grove is appeased, he said, again using the old syntax. It has been given more than necessary. Sometimes, the balance gives an overabundance of gifts. Karl, shaking violently, dropped the rifle. This is murder. The police, the law, the system. You cannot just decide who lives and who dies. Cliff responded with ancient indifference. The dying dove is nothing. The mountain lion who throws the wheel of life into error must be put to rest. You worry about a single dead man. I worry about the whole turning. Cliff's gaze made Karl realize the terrifying truth. All his civilization, his laws, his spreadsheets, were nothing but a fleeting, noisy moment to the grove. He was just a small, terrified animal in a vast, uncaring, ancient system. They walked back in silence. As they approached the ranger station, Karl finally spoke, defeated. In this grand, endless scheme. Who needs you? Why are you even here in this silly uniform? Cliff stopped. For the first time, a flicker of something human, a tiny, individual uncertainty crossed his features. Why am I here? The druid was momentarily separated from the collective, but the thought was instantly purged. He turned to Karl, the ancient presence restored. His answer was final. This is my place. He then ripped the 1832 personnel file into tiny shreds, letting the pieces be taken by the wind. Karl got into his sedan. He drove away quickly, ignoring the low battery warning and the unsettling knowledge that he was leaving 3 bodies behind. He was a witness to the truth he could never prove, a truth he would spend his life trying to ignore. Cliff stood alone in the gathering darkness. The balance was restored. The grove was safe. He was neither good nor evil. He was simply eternal. The end.